Morbidly beautiful radio. We horror.
Did you hear the one about the man who can't be destroyed? He was buried alive.
What more can you do to a human being? This is inhuman. He's got to be crushed just under the weight of that much dirt.
He was set on fire.
What the hell is going on? Come on! My God! The cat's get on fire!
They carried him away. But he keeps coming back. Don't be afraid. Be terrified.
As I lay me down to sleep, I pray my soul is mine to keep. My soul and never step outside this bed, never into all the evil. Now back from the dead.
Are you scared?
Be here.
And welcome to another episode of the Calling Hours Horror Podcast on Morbidly Beautiful Radio. Once again, it is I, your head undertaker, the dead man Michael Jones of MorbidlyBeautiful.com, Coffin Cuties Magazine, and Digital Dead Magazine. How's everyone doing this evening? It's going to be an absolutely fantastic episode as we are going to have fellow podcaster Dave Mareska of Hallow9ine Network on. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was on one of his podcasts as part of a 9-person panel talking about whether or not original film concepts in Hollywood were dead. And I found it to be an absolutely fascinating discussion. He had a wealth of really good podcasters on from the Hallow9ine Network. I really enjoyed myself. I felt like it was an informative podcast. It was done very differently than the way I do the calling hours, and I think that's a good thing. I really highly recommend any of my listeners going over to the Hallow9ine Network and checking out what Dave and his fellow podcasters are doing. So when he comes on this evening at 8:30, we're going to be talking horror, of course, podcasting in general, and just topics in the industry that not only touch on horror, but the industry as a whole, we're going to be talking a little bit about how women are treated in films, how the horror genre is perceived, and things like that. So I think it's going to be a really, really informative interview with him. And make sure to stay tuned for that, because that will start at approximately 8:30 this evening. In our digital dismemberment spotlights this evening, we're going to be doing another double feature of Scream Factory releases. We will be covering David Cronenberg's Rabid, the collector's edition Blu-ray. And I got to say, this is definitely one of my favorite David Cronenberg films. Of course, this is also the first mainstream casting film from Marilyn Chambers. And I really think she did a fantastic job in that. We'll definitely be talking about that here in a few moments. And I would like to point out that, of course, Joe Blasco did the special effects for that film. So it's really a great release. It's probably one of my favorite ones that Scream Factory has put out over the years. In our second digital dismemberment spotlight, we are going to be covering John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness Collector's Edition Blu-ray. And again, this is another one of my favorite releases that Scream Factory has put out over the years. As far as John Carpenter films go, this is definitely at the top of my list too. I'm a big fan of Halloween and The Thing, but there's just something about this particular film that I really liked. You had several people from Big Trouble in Little China in this one. We have Donald Pleasance. Hell, we even have Alice Cooper in this one. So, if you can't get down with that, there's something wrong with you. And again, when it comes to Scream Factory releases, this is definitely one of the top-notch ones that they've put out, as I said, over the years. There's plenty to like here, so make sure and stay tuned for that. We're going to have plenty of great metal in our Metal Massacre Spotlights. And as a matter of fact, let's go ahead and get into our first one. In our first Metal Massacre Spotlight this evening, we are highlighting the band Obituary. The name of the CD is Cause of Death, and the song is Cause of Death. Welcome back. You just heard Obituary. The CD was Cause of Death, and the song was Cause of Death. Just so you know, Cause of Death was the second album by American death metal band Obituary. It was released on September 19th of 1990. At the time, they were on Roadrunner Records, and currently their label is Relapse Records. Make sure to head on over to www.obituary.cc to find out about their upcoming European tour, to pick up band merchandise, and to see where else they're going to be playing here in the near future. But now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for some digital dismemberment. And in our first digital dismemberment spotlight this evening, we are covering David Cronenberg's Rabid, the collector's edition Blu-ray from Scream Factory. Now, this film was directed by David Cronenberg, and it was produced by John Dunning and Ivan Reitman. And of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, special effects were handled primarily by Joe Blasco, who, of course, is one of the special effects artists that helped to inspire what I do for a living. Now, the cast consisted of Marilyn Chambers, Frank Moore, Joe Silver, Howard Reichman, Patricia Gage, Susan Roman, and of course it was released by Scream Factory on November 22nd of 2016. Now, to give you a little bit more background information on the film, with Rabid, acclaimed director David Cronenberg delivers a high-tension thriller filled with a highly entertaining horror show that hasn't lost an iota of shock value. That quote, of course, is from DVD Savant. After undergoing radical emergency surgery, Rose develops an insatiable desire for blood. She searches out victims to satisfy her incurable craving, infecting them with an unknown disease which in turn swiftly drives them insane and makes them equally bloodthirsty. Follow the lovely but deadly Rose through her terrifying ordeal as victim by victim the spreading circle of casualties grows until no one can escape their grisly fate of becoming rabid. Now, in his fourth feature film, Cronenberg continues in the vein of scientific modifications to the human body that results in catastrophic events. Partly funded by the Canadian government and writing of the success of Shivers, the film shocked many people when porn actress Marilyn Chambers took the lead role. Now, originally, Sissy Spacek had been hoped for the role, but it went to Marilyn Chambers, and she ran with it. As much of a body horror film as it is a commentary on social breakdown, Cronenberg manages to get the most from his cast and crew. The scenes of martial law being enacted and how the government responds to the crisis are just as hair-raising as the infected victims tearing apart their victims. Chambers really presents herself well and shows a dynamic range in her acting, displaying that she was so much more than an actress who did porn in the beginning of her career. It really is a shame she never got more opportunities to showcase her talents as a leading lady in other genres. Many people saw the film as an allegory to the budding AIDS crisis that was overtaking the world. Keep in mind, this was 1976. And whether it was an intentional thought or not, it brought another level of tension to the film that the viewing public had rarely seen until this point. Even though he's uncredited, much kudos goes to Joe Blasco for the fantastic gore effects in this film. Now, to give you a little bit more about the plot, and there are spoilers in this, as the film opens, we see the young couple of Rose, who's played by Marilyn Chambers, and Hart, who's played by Frank Moore, enjoying a motorcycle ride through the fall-winter outside of Montreal. As they zip down the road, they are involved in a horrific crash after a van stalls out in the road in front of them. Hart escapes with minor injuries, but Rose is critically injured. The accident is witnessed by some patients at a nearby plastic surgery clinic, and an ambulance is dispatched to the scene. Rose's injuries are so severe that she is rushed into surgery to save her life, with the lead doctor, Dr. Dan Colloyd, using an experimental and controversial skin graft technique to try and restore her beauty. Hart is heartbroken at the thought of having possibly killed Rose, but he is assured by the doctors that everything that could be done to save her has been done. Colloyd promises to call Hart the moment that Rose regains consciousness and is told he can visit her anytime he feels like it. Now, Rose remains in a comatose state for over a month as the clinic monitors her healing progress until she wakes up screaming from her coma. A concerned patient hears her screams and comforts her, but while she is holding him, something emerges from a graft under her arm and impales itself into his side, easing her pain and almost putting her into an ecstatic state. Rose falls back into her comatose state for a bit, and the man that was attacked begins to exhibit strange signs of numbness and lethargy. He is sent to a major hospital to be looked at, but checks himself out before any real examination can be done. He hails a cab, but before long, he attacks the driver before the car crashes into another and is then hit by a tractor-trailer. Meanwhile, Rose awakens again and leaves the hospital, eventually stopping in a barn to get out of the weather. Her urge to feed strikes again, and she attempts to feed on a cow in the same manner she did to the patient in the hospital, but she becomes sick from it. The owner of the barn comes in and tries to sexually assault her, but she stabs him in the eye with the mysterious appendage and runs back to the hospital. Once there, she feeds on another patient that is resting in a hot tub and calls Hart, telling him that something is wrong and she wants him to come get her. As Hart heads to her, Colloyd talks with Rose about her condition and is mystified about what is happening to her. He too falls victim to her, later cutting off his wife's finger while they are in surgery and attacking other staff members. Rose uses the distraction to escape, and when Hart arrives, the police are there trying to handle the situation. Now, it seems that Rose's victims are infected with a new strain of rabies, and everyone that has been bitten or attacked is given shots to prevent the spread of the outbreak. Sadly, they have no effect, and the disease begins to spread everywhere as Rose attacks different victims along the way to Montreal. The government, at a loss for what to do, institutes martial law, even going as far to say that shooting the victims of this disease is the best way to deal with the situation. Rose makes it to a friend's house, going out to feed on various people. Hart does his best to track her down and witnesses several attacks and how the army disposes of the infected. As a last-ditch effort, he tracks her down to where she is staying and sees her feeding on her best friend. As he tries to talk to her and find out what is happening, they struggle and he is knocked out by Rose. She leaves and runs into another man, going back to his place. She calls Hart to tell him she's trying an experiment to see if she is really the one spreading the disease, locking herself in the room with the victim. Hart implores her to leave, but before she can, she's attacked by one of her own victims. The next day, her body is found in an alley and disposed of by the army. So once again, just a very chilling and well-made movie. Now, as far as the special features on this Blu-ray goes, we have a new 2K scan from the negative at director David Cronenberg's preferred aspect ratio of 1:661. There's new audio commentary with author Jill C. Nelson, who did Golden Goddesses, 25 Legendary Women of Classic Erotic Cinema from 1968 to 1985, and Marilyn Chambers' personal appearance manager, Ken Loach. Also new on this disc is a featurette entitled Young and Rabid, an interview with actress Susan Roman. There's also audio commentary with writer-director David Cronenberg. There's audio commentary with William Beard, who is the author of The Artist as Monster, the cinema of David Cronenberg. There's an archival interview with Cronenberg. There's an interview with executive producer Ivan Reitman. There's also an interview with co-producer Don Carmody. As far as other featurettes go, there is a From Stereo to Video, a video essay by Calum Vatnsdal, author of They Came From Within, A History of Canadian Horror Cinema. You have the original theatrical trailer and TV spot. You have US and UK radio spots, and a still gallery. Now, once again, Scream Factory has proven that they are amongst the best in the world, and not only giving us a cult classic that has been long overdue in a pristine format, but they also give us a wealth of bonus features that tells us everything that we could ever want to know about this film. I found that the 2K scan suffers from very little grain or print damage, even popping with vibrant color and rich sound. The audio commentaries hold a wealth of information, and all three of them show a positive experience on set. The archival interview with Cronenberg has been seen before, but it is a welcome addition to this release, and the inclusion of the new interviews with actress Susan Roman, executive producer Ivan Reitman, and co-producer Don Carmody again display a sense of worth and passion for the project. The video essay is certainly worth watching as well and gives us a great insight into Canadian filmmaking in general. Overall, this is a must-own for genre fans and well worth picking up. I give the movie a 4 out of 5, and I give the Blu-ray rating a 9 out of 10. You have to go pick this up. Make sure to head on over to ScreamFactory.com and pick up your copy of the Blu-ray Collector's Edition of David Cronenberg's Rabid before the prices go up on it when the Soska twins deliver their remake of it here in the coming year. Coming up in just a little bit, we're going to go into our feature interview with Dave Mareska of Hallow9ine Network, a fellow podcaster and a very interesting gentleman. But before that, we're going to go into our second Metal Massacre Spotlight this evening. And in this one, we are highlighting the band Cattle Decapitation. The CD is The Harvest Floor, and the song is The Gardeners of Eden. Welcome back. You just heard the band Cattle Decapitation. The CD was The Harvest Floor, and the song was The Gardeners of Eden. The Harvest Floor was the fifth full-length studio album by American death grind band Cattle Decapitation. It was released on January 20th of 2009. The label is Metal Blade Records, which is still their current label. Make sure to head on over to www.metalblade.com/Cattle Decapitation to find out about their current world tour, to find out about where else they're going to be playing, and to pick up some of their merchandise. But now it's time to go into our feature interview. And our guest this evening is another fellow podcaster. I was on a podcast with this gentleman about 2 weeks ago. It was absolutely fun. We had a bunch of other podcasters on with us. Please welcome from the Hallow9ine Network, Dave Mareska. Dave, thank you for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. Yeah, I think we actually had about a third of that panel was from my shop. So thank you for having me over to hang out over in your turf.
Oh, it's no problem, man. I kind of feel like, podcasting is the next big thing. I think it's something that helps fans like us get the ideas out to talk about the subject sometimes that the magazines and the websites aren't really discussing or really getting into. For you, kind of talk about for a minute how you got into podcasting and how Hallow9ine Network came together.
All right, cool. The Hallow9ine Network is really something that's been around probably since 2006 in some form. And back then, that was when podcasting was really, really in its infancy, and it was kind of a wild, wild west. There were so many different people doing so many different things, but it felt like a lot of them were people just talking almost aimlessly. There wasn't a lot of structure and agendas like there are now. And so we were kind of treating the Hallow9ine Network like our own channel on Weird Al Yankovic's UHF. You know what I mean? It was like a half talk show. Originally, it was supposed to showcase a band that was going under the same name, but the band didn't stay together very long. And the friends who used to hang out and get wasted and pretend we were on the radio, we liked doing that a lot more. So it didn't last very long in 2006. It only lasted for about 13 episodes, and it had a varying amount of content on there. And during the time when it went dark, I was with another group out of Chicago, and we basically were doing fandom podcasting, where we were just kind of covering different high concept sci-fi and drama TV shows. When I didn't want to be with that group anymore, just because of a sort of difference of views of where they were going and what the guy running it had in mind. I wanted to just go back and revive my old feed, and a couple people who also felt like leaving and didn't really have a new home to go to, they came with me. So we kind of started off just doing fandom podcasting again, but now we've branched out into a lot more. We're now launched our first audio drama, which actually, as we're recording this, is airing on milehighradio.com. It's called Tangent City. It'll be downloadable by the holidays, but right now we've kind of got this thing going where we air it with Mile High Radio first to really go for that TV feel. And that's kind of how we think of ourselves over at Hallow9ine Network. We're kind of like a cable station. We have over 30 different RSS feeds catering to all things from talk shows about show genres and show types and movie genres, and some shows that are covering specific TV shows, mostly Netflix stuff. And we do have a horror show called The Horror Cast, and that is show run and hosted by Liz Joplin, who was also on the podcast with us a couple of weeks ago. So that one kind of caters to the world of horror, which sounds like the playground we're hanging out in tonight over here at your spot.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Now, you mentioned Mile High Radio. Kind of tell my listeners a little bit about Mile High, because I know that's something that I know I would like to get Morbidly Beautiful Radio and the Calling Hours Horror Podcast involved with.
Yeah, milehighradio.com is an internet radio station, and I happen to be colleagues and compatriots, I guess you would say, with the programming director over there, a very lovely person named Lynn Burnett, and she's part of the Terraformer Artists Union, which is pretty much where all of us who have been, kind of meeting up and hanging out and guesting on each other's podcasts have been meeting up. And for International Podcast Day, which for anyone who doesn't know is September 30th every year. This was the second annual one this year. It's kind of a new movement we're trying to get some traction for out there. They decided to open up some free slots to new podcasts, new and emerging podcasts who are trying to find, some exposure. And it was totally like a first come, first serve, and it just turned out that a whole bunch of the people who were in the Artists Union wound up jumping on this opportunity. So on Saturdays and Sundays, you can hear not only Hallow9ine Network, but some of our other friends like Terraformer and Ranting and Raving, and a whole bunch of other folks who are all members of the Terraformer Artists Union. And so, yeah, they're very podcast friendly. They're a great place to find shows and find other podcasts if you're a podcaster and just kind of want to see what different kinds of shows are out there. They have all kinds of different shows serving all kinds of different audiences, including audio drama folks. So check it out.
Yeah, I mean, the Terraformer people have been very nice to me. I was extended an invitation, and I met people through a short film I worked on with the guys through Vision 20 Films. So I think it's nice. I think that's one of the things sometimes that gets overlooked and is missing in our industry, is a lot of times people feel the need for competition, and what I think what we forget sometimes is it's good to have affiliations with one another. Like I said, to me it was a blast coming onto the podcast, what was it, almost 2 weeks ago. It's sometimes it's hard when you have that many people on to get your point across, but it was nice to be on there with so many people that were like-minded and that have that passion. Now,
Yeah.
As someone who writes for websites and magazines, in addition to working in the genre, I know sometimes it's not always easy to get people to come on, to talk, to discuss ideas and things. To you, do you feel like podcasting really is the medium of now? Has print died? Is it just going more towards digital and visual formats?
It's funny, and I think anybody who's probably trying to build their own web presence will probably find out pretty quickly also. You'd think with how much of just the shift has been in just making the technology to be able to do this so available. I mean, if you buy a Mac, you literally have everything you need in the box. It comes with GarageBand, comes with iMovie. But really all you need is GarageBand, and some imagination. I think, it's almost like YouTube. Anybody can be a filmmaker because of YouTube. That doesn't mean that everybody posts something there is fucking talented. So, keep that in mind. But and so there is an element I always like to stress, and I know it sounds like I sound like a curmudgeonly old man, to be honest with you. I know it almost makes me sick hearing it, but there's a certain level of be ready to do some of the work if you want your shit to get noticed. If you want to be bringing in a couple 100,000 downloads a month and a couple 100,000 website hits, and trying to get Google AdSense. One of the things Google AdSense requires is a certain amount of copy appearing on your page every day, week, month to become eligible for them to consider letting you have paid ads on there. So as much as it seems like it would be going away, I think print, and I'm thankful at the very least, digital print seems to be sticking around and having a presence that is not only needed but required by the powers that be to a certain extent. I do have a fear that books are going away. The tangible print, and I don't know. There's a whole generation that probably doesn't know what it's like to go buying, actual comic books or magazines. Want to go to Guitar Center and pick up Ripped and shit. Want to check out some riffs from the fucking Metal Edge. But that is a little weird, and I just think maybe people who grew up with that are gonna have to deal with the fading nostalgia of knowing that's gone. But podcasting is definitely becoming not only more prominent but more understood. Finally, I think there is far less times I have to actually explain to people what a podcast is when I tell them I have one.
Sure. Now, one of the things that I find interesting, with media, print media starting to, if you want to say, die off. I mean, you look at one of the all-time classics, like Fangoria magazine is gone. I never thought I would see that day.
And I think is Rolling Stone considering going fully digital as well? I know that they've had an online presence that's sort of like the companion to their magazine, but that's another sort of staple from the music world, and I guess more than just music. It's definitely. It's an awkward time, I think. You're a Zennial, right? You're kind of in between millennials and Generation X, or are you a little bit older than that?
I think I'm a little bit older than that. I'll be 42 in February, so.
All right, word, yeah. So you're probably a little bit more in the Gen X crowd, but anyone who was around from the point where there was no internet to where the internet was a new thing, like we remember the 100 free hours of AOL being the only way we could get on and shit. So now it's like so commonplace that if you don't have internet, it's almost like, all right, we're not staying at this hotel. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's you never do that. Although I guess porn being solely on the internet probably should have been a good indicator.
Right.
It's like half the internet is just there to support pornography.
Well, one of the reasons I bring that up is, this whole thing with net neutrality is coming up, this vote on net neutrality.
Oh, shit.
And I read an interesting article, and let me get your thoughts on this because, with the way modern things are, CDs are becoming dinosaurs, DVDs and Blu-rays, of course, magazines, books. But I read an interesting article that if this whole net neutrality thing, this vote goes through, people were talking about the possibility of the internet kind of pricing itself out. And if that happened, we may see a return to magazines and DVDs and Blu-rays and CDs. What is your thoughts? What's your thought on that?
I would absolutely, I'm kind of almost like smiling like a kid on Christmas morning right now. I would love to see the article that talks about that, because that is the only sort of happy silver lining I could see. There are some downsides definitely for people like you and I would say right away, and that's that anyone who is sort of in the startup mode or in the sort of foundational building mode right now in a digital empire kind of place, digital realm, if you will, we're going to be the ones that then lose the access to being able to reach an audience like this. If it goes back to printing, the production costs alone were kind of an obstacle for people at one time that the internet and availability of software kind of took away. So that's something to keep in mind as well, that you're going to definitely need a lot more startup capital unless you really want to talk about going to like the street level and go zines, you know, and that's like the cheapest is running to Staples and just Xerox copying 200 copies and like trying to throw it around and see who will take it. But it's going to be an interesting if we have to go that full cycle back again. But at the same time, they say when stuff like this happens is when a lot of ingenuity starts to come to the surface. People become a little bit more innovative, and I'm sure there'll be some way for us to get around it. But I know it's a hard thing. I'm really like holding out some kind of hope that there'll be a stroke of sanity and we'll get the net neutrality upheld. But the tide seems to be very turned against that, and it's a scary time. I'm very nervous about it. I'm trying to just keep my mind on continuing to create and keep feeding the beast with Hallow9ine for as long as we can. But yeah, I just feel like when we see stuff like this happening, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like it's an interesting crossroads. You know, like I have a 16-year-old daughter who will be 17, and it's funny. Like when we go out, I'll tease her about, you know, technology and stuff. We were in a shop the other day, and you know, like she knows what a record player is, but you know, like I teased her. I said, "Oh, you know, that's a record player. Oh, that's a typewriter." And then I saw a cassette tape, and I said, "Do you know what that is?" And she looked at me and she goes, "Yeah, that's a cassette tape." And then you look off to the side, and there was an 8-track. And I was like, "Do you know what that is?" And she was like, "Oh, I think it's a tape." And I was like, "Yeah, that's an 8-track. That was tape before there was tape." You know, so it's kind of funny how the technology and all of these things are starting to come full circle. Like, you know, I remember the days of going to the mall, and there used to be 2 or 3 bookstores in a mall. Now you're lucky if there's a Barnes and Nobles anywhere near your mall.
Yeah, it's usually a separate building that's their own. It's you know, Barnes and Nobles even has a coffee shop inside, and they sell not only books, they sell computer software, they sell movies, they sell video games, they sell CDs, they sell vinyl. You know, they will carry a collector's item or two, but it's just the fact of everything. So you might as well be a Target. You know what I mean? Trying to sell every genre you can under one roof. How many different places like this can we need, you know? And I don't know. And it's also, you've got different versions of these places being owned by different organizations that do and do not cater to different belief structures. So you've got, what is it, like Kmart won't sell anything that's explicit. There's like this whole weirdness to the way that our system has been structured for so long, and I think we were used to it for a while, but then the internet giving us so much access to anything we wanted at any time, it's going to be hard to go back to wearing chains like that, you know?
I don't know. I've always been one of those guys, like, I like to own movies on a DVD or a Blu-ray. I like to own a CD with music, you know?
Yeah, because my biggest fear wasn't that the internet would become priced out and none of us could use it. My biggest thing was, hey, what happens when it just breaks? You know what I mean? There's going to be a day when some server farm just blows up and lightning hits it or some shit, and the internet just goes down. Like the whole fucking thing. Just imagine. That would be pandemonium. But I'd at least be able to sit inside and still watch my Blu-rays because they'll work. You know what I mean? They don't need the internet to work. I can still play video games, most of them.
That would be funny because, like I said, you know, it's like, you know, a lot of kids today, I mean, it sounds funny to say it, but it's true. You know, they don't know what a book is. They read things on their Kindle. They read things on their phones. You know, it's just funny how it might all come full circle and we can go back to quote unquote the caveman days.
Yeah, it's like Battlestar Galactica. We have to fly all this shit into the sun and start over. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't watched that.
Shame on you if you haven't, anyway. But
seriously, talk about an awesome show. If only it was a horror show, it would make more sense for us to talk about.
Well, you know, I mean, you know, sci-fi horror. I'm open as long as we touch on horror at some point, which we certainly will. Now, in fact, we'll go ahead and do that. When I was on your podcast, you know, I found the topic to be interesting, and the topic, for those of you that haven't listened to the show yet, even though I've shared the link, shame on you if you haven't listened to it yet, was we talked about whether or not original story ideas were dead for horror in Hollywood. And like I said, we had a great panel of guests. It was a very lively discussion. We talked
Yeah.
about a lot of different things there. And, just to recap it just for a second, I kind of felt like it was, kind of tell people what your opinion on that was.
Well, I mean, first of all, just so everybody is 100% aware of how the structure of that went, there were 9 of us, which I can understand just from looking at the freeze frame when the play button is on there. It's a little overwhelming. I think sometimes it's even overwhelming to be on a show with that many people. But I think for how many people there were, I know I get a little obviously verbose if anybody hasn't figured it out by now listening to this. Yes, I go on rants.
There's nothing
But
wrong with that.
I like to think at least they come full circle to someplace like, oh shit, we're back at the place we started. Okay, and now he's handing it back over. But that was basically an episode of the Terraformer Podcast, which is hosted and created by the awesome Drew Carson, the founder of the Terraformer Artists Union. And that show is also being hosted by CJ Ripka of the Raw and Real podcast, who has been sort of making it a trend and a thing lately to not only host mega shows for other people, but to do an awful lot of promoting of shows, sometimes without people's knowledge. He, for like a week, was running promos about my audio drama Tangent City, and I had no idea he was doing it. Someone's like sent me a PM one day and said, "Yo, Ripka's talking about your show," and I was like, "What?" And I mean, like, I'll take the free publicity. That was awesome. So Ripka's a really cool guy to be friends with. So everyone check him out. Him and Lynn, who I mentioned earlier from iRadio, also co-host a show called Great and Grace. You can see it becomes a little bit of like a artistically incestuous family over here at the Terraformer Artists Union. And that also, I think, played out in the show itself, with 9 of us on there, and a guy who clearly has been speaking for, I think, 2.5 minutes straight right now. He could see it might get a little hard to get a word in edgewise, but I think everybody got a lot of airtime. We did a pretty good job of letting everybody speak and have their moments and shit.
Well, let's talk about a subject that's going on that's just general in the film industry for a second, because it certainly touches on all genres. It touches on all aspects of filmmaking. We have this whole situation with what happened with Harvey Weinstein, and we have all these actors that their names are getting called out, and all of this. The Harvey Weinstein situation is a situation where, it seems pretty cut and dry that he did the things that he was accused of. And now we see just recently, allegedly, because, I mean, we can't prove anything factual yet because I haven't seen anything that's 100% credible, but now Bryan Singer's name has been brought into this.
I hadn't seen that today.
So, what are your thoughts on all of this? And I know it may sound insensitive to some listeners, so let me lay this out. Like I said, the Weinstein situation is different. That's pretty much been corroborated by God knows how many people. But what are your thoughts on some of these singular allegations where people are losing jobs without a conviction? What are your thoughts on how all of this is going?
All right. Well, before I even delve into a territory like that, I'll go ahead and just put a little bit of a disclaimer out that obviously anything I say is just my own personal opinion. It doesn't necessarily reflect the full opinions of any or all members of the Hallow9ine Network Incorporated. So before anyone feels like picking up a Twitter rifle, let's just chill out for a second. I think we're all entitled to opinions that I guess people might find controversial. In general, especially with Bryan Singer, I feel like I definitely have heard rumors, and there have been stories in the news about him before, so I don't think it's a singular thing with him either. And my thoughts in general are, it's going to be a little hard for me to be able to watch a lot of movies that I grew up loving. Especially now, because these are the kind of things that once you hear them, you can't unhear them. And so how am I supposed to watch The Usual Suspects without thinking, one, every time I see Kevin Spacey on screen, it's like, oh, hey, how many fucking PAs did you, fucking rape or molest or, you know, harass today, every day that you were filming this, that people, you know, were afraid to lose their jobs, so they didn't say anything. Bryan Singer, you know, same thing. How many young guys did you probably take advantage of on the set of this movie? Because, you know, and I know that's probably a wrong to take that kind of an exaggerated view, but when you start to hear just the sheer numbers that some of these allegations are coming out with, I mean, Harvey Weinstein is at what, 24 accusers or something like that, 27.
Sure.
Or am I thinking that could be the president for all I know? It's there are the vast numbers though. It's always more than one or two for the bigger names. Like Louis C.K., I think there was at least 5 people that came forward and said that he did the same thing. And he is the only one that has at least enough integrity to admit that he did it and to say that he needs help. It's arguable. There's been rumors that even up until the day before that broke his publicist and he were trying to keep it quiet. But it seems like that's just been the MO. It makes it hard to want to even get close to that industry. You know, I know people who were in it who are now, you know, leery of taking jobs in it because people they've worked with before have turned out to be people who are getting, you know, the whole thing with Cord Feldman fingering, no pun intended, Charlie Sheen for sodomizing Corey Haim on the set of Lucas. You know, I mean, that kind of shit where you're like, you know, I remember being in kindergarten watching that movie and we all just thought it was a movie that was made for our age group as a kind of a coming of age story of overcoming bullies and becoming popular and being strong in your own personality. And now I'm just watching it going, this kid was getting like molested and sexually abused every day they were making this. Like, how can I be entertained? How can I feel innocent? And it's too late. You know, the money was paid. The movie tickets were already sold. The VHSs were already purchased. So it's not like you can boycott, you know, you just have these things now that are like monuments to these horrific things that children and women have been going through for a long time in an industry that all of us support. You know, it's tough to feel okay about these things, but there's also a certain level of like, at least it's coming to light, but what else can we do? What can I do? Should I just throw all my shit away? You know what I mean? Should I just not keep any of my stuff anymore? My entire Blu-ray collection?
Right.
It's a tough spot to be in, right? To have that principle.
Well, let me turn this to the horror genre. Okay. So, and we're going to stay in this topic because I know that when you and I had been messaging, I know I sent you the article I wrote about Victor Salva and Roman Polanski. Now, I know this is touchy, but you know, you're the kind of guy that I definitely want to have this kind of conversation with, especially because
I actually have not read the article, so I'm sorry, man. I totally fucking brain farted on that. I'm just going to admit to it right now, just in case we get too far in and there was like a contingency of having read that. You know?
Oh, no. Well, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. You know, what it was is...
just from what you said, I could figure out what it's about, you know?
You know, it was... You know, I'm not making excuses for any of them or what they did, but... You know, kind of one of the things that bothered me, especially being a horror genre fan, was, you know, Victor Salva committed his crimes, you know, 30 years ago. He went to jail. He didn't take a plea deal. Granted, he only got 3 years. He served 15 months. He was released. Okay? Now, at the time, and here's the thing that we got to remember. We're talking about 30 years ago. The laws were different than what they are now, okay? Now, he served his time. He's continued to work in the film industry. You know, many of his hits came after he came out of jail. Jeepers Creepers was after he served his time. Jeepers Creepers 2 was after he served his time. And a lot of people like those horror films. And as horror films, I thought that they were good horror films. Can you, because of what you said about, you know, certain movies in your collection, Kevin Spacey, this, that, you know, is it possible to enjoy the film but separate the artist from the art? Because when you talk about a film, a film is not just that one person.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah, and I think it's probably a little extreme, an extreme to have gone to set it that way. And I think maybe there's a greater level of disappointment for someone like Kevin Spacey, who's like an Academy Award winner, who maybe was even a little bit of a sort of iconic type of person to look up to. And Bryan Singer, the guy made a great film, made a couple great films, and I think there's no way I could be watching Days of Futures Past, and be going, oh, this fucking sucks because that guy probably had sex with kids while they were making it. Like it's still gonna be parts where I'm going, oh, that's Wolverine and he's kicking ass. That's fucking awesome.
right?
You know what I mean? It's horribly disappointing, I think, and especially like Jeepers Creepers was a fucking scary horror movie. I actually like Jeepers Creepers 2 a lot more than I like the first one. But I think the first one was good to kind of start kicking off this trilogy mythology that they're going for. And he also did Powder, right? Didn't
Yes.
Mr. Silva do Powder? That one, there were some moments in there you could kind of get a little bit of an odd vibe from, and maybe that was affected by the fact that it was publicized that he had his history. I have done it, so I guess I can't really speak too badly about it, but I think there's a weird acknowledgement your mind has to do, going through it, but, do we hold musicians, do we stop listening to the music of great musicians who go on these crazy drug benders? You know what I mean? It's like we can separate certain artists from their art, it seems much easier than Hollywood. But Hollywood is seeming to prove itself to be the most monstrous. So I don't know if there's a way to balance those scales,
Well, the reason I bring this up, and you just brought it up, we talk about separating the art from the artist, and you had mentioned, do we stop watching great directors and actors because of their crimes? And that's where the Roman Polanski connection comes in. And when I wrote that article, what I found interesting was you would be surprised how many people gave him a pass on his crimes. And as it has turned out recently, he's been accused by several more women who said that when he went to Europe, when he fled the country, he did the same thing to them that he did to his victim here in the States.
Yeah.
And it's just funny, Polanski fled the country. His list of crimes were very similar to Polanski's. Do people look at Victor Salva differently because his crime was against a boy, whereas Polanski's was against a girl?
Oh, I think for anybody to pretend that not only the media, but I think just people in general, if you want to look at the way that the sort of winds of change are hitting the country right now, there is definitely an insanely higher level of sensitivity towards anything that is dealing with same-sex or anything that's not heteronormative than there ever has been with the same exact situations dealing with power dynamics between men and women. It's funny, when I was in college, one of the courses I wound up taking, I designed my own major at this liberal arts school in Maryland called Washington College, and one of the courses that was available that I kind of had to take because it was an honors level course was this course on women in film, which is rough if you're a guy. Not to be so primitive about it. There's some realities there, and at least in the early 2000s, like, or the late 90s, I think it was either 99 or 2000. And so what I wound up doing, because it was me and one of the only other, there were like 2 or 3 other guys in the course, and me and this one other dude, we were big Martin Scorsese fans. So we had to do this presentation, and we did it on how in these Martin Scorsese films, the violence between the men is what's like glamorized and shown in like really cool cinematic ways, like, you know, the sort of like almost dreamlike quality when there's like smoke drifting through from somebody's cigarette right before like Joe Pesci starts stabbing somebody with a butcher knife. And then in the same movie, like a guy will turn around and smack his wife or like throw Sharon Stone down the stairs in Casino, and it's not in slow motion. There's no music cues. It's like just like the men treat women like shit, and it's such a sort of like such a normal part of that world that they don't have to show it in any sort of special way. It's when the guys are challenging each other for power or, you know, taking revenge, that it's like all of a sudden the violence is really glamorized and really shown to be this sort of almost like magical, mythical thing. And I think with horror, I don't know if it's the same way. I think horror has been maybe even more pioneering in showing women in powerful roles. You know, how many horror films have a female heroine that winds up fighting and killing a monster? Or, you know, who gets away in Texas Chainsaw Massacre? One of the women who's obviously going to be fucked up for the rest of her life, but at least it's like a female character that's sort of in that, and just in surviving saves the day in that movie, you know? So there's definitely, it's hard to say that it's just because it's a sort of sexually oriented crime. It definitely, I think, when you're looking at should we judge the filmmaker, you know, is Kevin Spacey more shocking because he was assaulting men and not women when all the other guys we're hearing about were assaulting women? You know, I think there's a difference. Whether that's right or wrong, you know, can be argued. People can get all pissed about it if they want. But I think people do treat it differently. I'm not saying I do. I'm saying sometimes I probably do, but
well, see, right? And that's one of the other aspects that people have said to me about that article is, well, Salva makes B-rated horror films. Well, Roman Polanski makes high art films. Roman Polanski's won an Oscar. Do you feel like that should make a difference? The quality of your film shouldn't make a difference that you've committed a sex crime, should it?
I don't think, you know, I think it's sort of like, are we able to really say one thing 100% has to do with the other? You know, I mean, you could arrest a sex criminal and they could paint incredible murals on the prison cell wall. You know what I mean? It's, I can't say I didn't enjoy The Ninth Gate. You know, knowing who made the film didn't affect me watching it. And maybe that's because when it came out, I was a lot younger. I didn't have the sort of intellectual capability to sort of think about these things in a more principled manner. If it didn't affect me, it didn't affect me. Maybe we all find it easier to live in a bubble when we're in our rebellious youth. But I don't know. Victor Silva, I think the only reason it got so popularized is because it was a homosexual crime. You know, it's the same reason that same-sex marriage is a talking point politically and sensitively, religiously, whatever you want to look at it, controversially. But at the same time, I don't think that it in any way is an excuse, you know, and I don't think that one type of sexual assault should be more, you know, revolting than another. I think all violation is just equally fucking horrible. So if we look at it on that level, you know, in my mind, the thing is that's weird is you can't make the movies unexist, right? You can't. It's like the shit, his personal life shit happened, and a movie got made. So what do you want to do? You know, should we just get up and scream about it? Like they're not. We don't have time machines. You can't go back in time to make either one of these things not happen. So if the movie's there and it's a good movie, I don't know. Maybe it's okay to hang up the fucking controversy coke for a minute, you know, and just sit back and enjoy it.
Sure. Now, to continue on in the horror vein, you know, I remember on the podcast, the one that we all did together, we had talked about original ideas, and I had brought up Rob Zombie and his films. And, you know, I had talked about, from my perspective, you know, the trend over the last decade and a half in Hollywood has pretty much been to make a lot of horror
PG-13, so it's more quote unquote marketable, so teenagers can go and get in. And I feel like in a lot of ways it's diluted the quality of what we call horror. Of course, being an older horror fan, I remember the days when horror was there to shock you, to disgust you, to make you feel like you needed to take a shower after you watched it. And when Rob Zombie came along, he came along at a time when the genre needed a kick in the ass. He went back to that ultra violent style. And I remember, I don't know if it was you or if it was CJ, someone made a crack about me mentioning Rob Zombie's films. When you look at how far film has progressed and you look at where society has progressed, we had kind of touched upon how we as a whole have become desensitized to violence. We see murder on the news, we see bombings, we see, mass suicides, we see shooters, we see all of these terrible things that go on, and they're on network TV and nobody says anything. But the minute you put it in the film, people start protesting, especially when it's in the horror genre. Do you feel like the ultra violent horror film still has a viable audience? And why do you think that people have turned on it the way that they have, even though they scream that's what they want?
I think there's there's always been this sort of social tendency to sort of say one thing because it seems like that's the acceptable and expected perspective to have, but then your wallet does the true talking for you. I mean, how can we really have so many people who are super conservative and really think it's so sinful, but then porn is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry? I mean, those fucking tapes don't just sell themselves, and I think horror is the same way. I think anything that's challenging, there's going to be somebody who doesn't like to be challenged, and I think the idea of confronting things that are scary is very challenging to people. When you think of the Grindhouse film that came out, a lot of people say, what was the scary one? Well, Monsters are the one about a guy driving a car around and killing people with it, and everyone says the guy driving the car because that's some shit that could really happen. There are people who would go that crazy and design it so that they get away with it. The idea that people are getting away with murder is a pretty scary thing. We live in a society that we're told has rules to prevent that. And I think that's what horror movies are. I mean, the idea that there's a guy in a hockey mask who no matter how fast you run or where you hide, he's going to find you and he's going to, with his bare hands sometimes or with a machete, cut you in half. And there's nothing you can do about it, I mean, a lot of it, too, I think the horror genre always was sort of our constant reminder that we are mortal. It's the slow approach of death is either going to get you when you're old, or it'll get you when you're a kid too wasted to realize that you wandered into dangerous woods. So I think it's easy to immediately rail against the thing that's scary, and for a lot of people, I think the assault on their sensibilities of watching people get hacked up, or a guy who attacks you in your sleep, and if he kills you in your dreams, it kills you in real life, and the thought of being in such peril when you're at your most vulnerable. These are all the kinds of things that it's a lot easier to just rail against than to sit through and then live with and let that swim around in your head. Because again, it's like, once you see some things, you can't unsee them, right? So it's one of the reasons I never watched the Daniel Pearl beheading tape from Iraq, because I had people who watched it said, dude, once you hear this guy screaming and dying, that shit'll haunt your dreams. I've had things from horror movies that have done that to me. I don't want a real tape of someone actually dying doing that to me. So it's the scariest thing is that what we're really scared of is our own imaginations, and that's the one thing we can't ever get in touch with. We can thing that's setting off our imagination and realizing that our minds are scarier than anything that's already on tape,
Sure. Now, you had mentioned women's studies, women in horror, and let's go in that vein for a few moments, because I find that to be a fascinating subject.
Sure.
Definitely, I feel like there should be more opportunities for female directors in all genres, in particular the horror genre, since that's pretty much where I live. But I've always found the argument interesting when people say that women are treated so misogynistically, especially in horror films, the nudity, the sex, the murder. But it's an interesting point when you look at the genre as a whole, in particular classics. At the end of the day, it's usually 99% of the time, it's the female that survives. It's the female that kills the monster. It's the female that's the hero. Do you feel, or what are your thoughts on how women are portrayed, particularly in horror films? And do you kind of feel like they get a bad rap sometimes because the woman is the hero at the end?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a mixed bag there, right? Because there's definitely a certain amount of the industry and the history of horror has included it's more than a fair sampling of gratuitous nudity.
Sure.
And I think the action genre is just as guilty of that, and so is the sci-fi, and it would be ludicrous for us to not have some level of admission that seeing naked people on the screen is titillating enough that, if you put it in a movie or a TV show, Game of Thrones, and no one disputes how awesome that show is when it's really like very, very pornographic at times. Like American Gods, same way. But I think there's a certain level of, when you look at a novel, let's say, there could be an array of characters, but there's usually one character that winds up, rising to the surface and being the focus. So if the female who survives, the female who kills the monster, is the one that in the movie version of the story is the one that rises to prominence, all the other stuff around it is really always supposed to be kind of caricature-esque and really just more window dressing. This is like basic structure, right, of drama and prose, right? So, of course, there's going to be this sort of exaggerated, sort of ditzy. If you're doing the typical teenagers romp in the woods, getting away from society, but they've also gotten away from the safety, so now they're prey to the serial killer. Well, what do young people do when they go on vacation? Clearly, they're going to get away to fuck. This is something that is not that hard to admit is true. So, the caricature of that is going to be the kid running around naked, the kid's going skinny dipping. So, there's arguments to be made. There's a show that was on Showtime called The Affair. Everybody agreed was like this high art show. And it was basically about people running around fucking each other while on vacation. There's like plenty of nudity there. Game of Thrones, like I said, is not tainted by the amount of sex and nudity that are involved in the show. In fact, it becomes kind of plot points. Whose kid is who got who pregnant? When could that have happened? Shit like that. I think horror movies can be credited for following probably some of more of the laws of nature. Isn't it like when you look at lions, are the female lions the ones that are actually the more vicious? Like they're the ones who protect the cubs, and if you get near the cubs, they will fucking destroy you. There's a certain level of that horror movies have always been a lot more clear on recognizing. They may have fallen a lot more onto some more religious tropes of focusing on is the female's purity involved in whether or not she's worthy of surviving. Do virgins definitely live through movies more than the more promiscuous characters? And I think there's arguments to be made either way. There's plenty of examples both sides of those arguments. So, I don't know. I think that also there's a level of fun to it too. Who doesn't like seeing nudity? You're just like, oh yeah, where nakedness, awesome. I wish that was me. There's supposed to be a level of escapism. And when you see people getting it on, you're like, all right, cool. If I get enough details, I can work with that. I can escape my mundane life in this moment, saying, yeah, that would be cool if I was that person if they're getting involved in that.
Well,
until you get cut in half, then that would suck. Then you're like, oh fuck, that would probably happen to me too, right? As I'm getting some, we're chopped up. That's great.
Well, and that's an interesting point. And again, that's something we touched on the podcast we all did together. If you look back at it historically, horror films are the ones that break a lot of the social taboos that make it acceptable to see things in other films. Like I had brought up, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho was famous for a couple of reasons. The first, primarily, the two big ones was, if you remember at the beginning of the scene, you see, the girl that stole the money and the guy that she was with, you see them in bed together. Now, you don't see them having sex, but that was one of the first times you saw an unmarried couple lying in bed together. And now that's a norm in everything, but it was a shocking taboo at its time. Psycho was the first movie to actually show a flushing toilet on screen. That was taboo before then, and now it's commonplace.
That's the kind of thing that you're just like, how? But like, once you had the technology of a camera, why? You can't tell me someone didn't. What probably happened is one of the first people that did that actually probably filmed shit in the toilet or something that everyone was like, okay, you know what? We just can't trust ourselves. That's it. Toilets are just off limits. Fuck that. No one's allowed to put it in the laws. No one's allowed to fucking shoot toilets. It's interesting that those are the things that people were sensitive about, or even like some words that weren't able to be used, like people weren't even allowed to say tummy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Things like that were like so like that was on par with saying the N-word now, and you're just like, what? Or pregnant. You couldn't say somebody was pregnant.
Right.
So yeah, I guess and I guess Psycho, for all of its technical filmmaking milestones, is definitely a horror movie. To think that it was the one that broke the boundaries definitely speaks highly of the genre,
and that's where my question leads in is, what, do you think sometimes people forget how historical and groundbreaking horror films can be?
Yeah, it's definitely not the first probably descriptor that comes to mind when you ask your typical movie fan, unless they've already got a love for the horror genre. If they're just like a casual fan that doesn't like horror very much, I don't think, groundbreaking is going to be one of the words. Probably people immediately would think of things like Star Wars, and George Lucas. That's groundbreaking. But, to be able to get people to not go in the water during a hot summer because you have created the tail of a shark that just came to a place where people swim, and whether that was intended or not, that speaks a lot to how we respond to being scared.
Sure.
People loved the movie, but it created a boogeyman. You know what I mean? I mean, think of even things like War of the Worlds, like preying on the fear that people would have of an extraterrestrial invasion and purposely timing your broadcast so that people would miss the part that says at the beginning it's just a fictional tale and that it's not real, but then you design the whole thing as if it's a fucking newscast. You know what I mean? Like that's some genius level shit. And I mean, you know that he knew that he was going to be causing pandemonium, and when Freddy Krueger is created, you're giving your nightmare to a whole bunch of other people. There's a certain level of horror that is, I think, on a visceral level that not all the other genres can touch all the time.
No, and I think that's a very valid point, and that's why I enjoy telling people like these little tidbits. It's a lot of the things that we see in horror that people can, it's taboo, and then it comes into mainstream dramas and action adventures, and then all of a sudden it's acceptable, and oh, we're not going to protest it anymore. But if it's in a horror movie, we're going to protest it. I find that to be, and I don't know if I want to say hypocritical, but I think it's interesting that sometimes I think horror films get a bad rap sometimes because people can't get past the visual. A lot of good horror films usually have a layer of subtext underneath what you're seeing on the screen, and I think people overlook that sometimes, and I think the genre is definitely unfairly maligned because of things like that.
Yeah, and I think for some people, they don't see necessarily as much of a value in the type of storytelling. I mean, like, the idea, I think some of the first real staging grounds of mythology storytelling are in the first majorly recognizable franchises of, say, like the 80s, which were mostly horror. You know, other than your Star Wars and your sort of Lethal Weapons, your Rockies and your Rambos were on, and they're all caricature, all of them. For the same, you know, iconic franchises you had in the action genre, and then you had Beverly Hills Cop, you know, you had comedy genre analogs as well. You have Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees. You have Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, the Halloween films. They were the first places where they really, like, everyone built upon the mythology that the last one left behind. Even if they kill the guy every movie and he comes back in the beginning of the next one, you don't care, because you're going to learn something new about why that character is the way that they are, and, like, what went into creating this, like, nightmare figure. And sometimes the things that scare us don't make as much sense as we want them to. So you can have all these sort of conflicting details start popping up, and like, well, how does that all work? I don't know. He's still fucking scary, though. You know what I mean? So I think that there can be a lot of value in a lot of different types of storytelling and literature. You know, I mean, people don't ever give Stephen King the credit. He hasn't, you know, risen to be taught as literature in schools, but so many people have read his work and agree that he has this sort of talent for description that pulls you in, and he's been able to build worlds that they want to make franchise films out of, you know? So it's,
Yes.
there's definitely something to be said for, even if the quote-unquote intelligentsia or elite in a fandom aren't recognizing that, doesn't mean it doesn't have the same level or value of storytelling. So horror to me is, if you can handle it, if your imagination doesn't run away with you too much and make you so that you can never sleep again, or if that's what you're looking for, then yeah, man, horror has just as much development and storytelling capability as all the other genres does.
Now, as another side note to that, you know, the model for, and I'll say it again, just because horror is what I follow more. And it's not to say it doesn't happen in other genres, but I notice it more in the horror industry. You know, why do you think, or what do you think about so many good independent horror films these days doing their own self-distribution, you know, downloads, streaming, and things like that? Why doesn't Hollywood see the value in good films, for example, like The Babysitter, which went straight to Netflix? Fantastic movie, well made, well crafted, didn't have an enormous multi-million-dollar budget, and then they go out and spend $20 million on some garbage film, and it tanks at the box office, and they say, oh, horror is a dying genre. Why is it that Hollywood just can't seem to find that connect? They let these great independent films go to self-distribution, and they keep putting out this garbage.
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, there is definitely a shift coming that almost you would think maybe the industry is sabotaging itself into it. But if streaming is going to be where all the good stuff is, then the theatrical experience will start to change and maybe even go away, because if what's coming out in the theaters is subpar, why will we spend the money? See, the thing is with the theater, it's money every single engagement. When you have something like Netflix where you're paying your monthly fee and it's like a monthly flat fee, you're getting a lot more entertainment bang for your buck there. So there's a certain level of, if you want to get it in front of the most eyes, I mean, look at something like Stranger Things, you know, with only 8 episodes in that first season, the amount of popularity it got, the level of notoriety, how it became such like a movement to be a fan of Stranger Things. It might not necessarily be such a bad thing for a cool new project to go straight to a streaming service. That said, people like us, again, who grew up in the eras of always waiting for the next, you know, Friday the 13th to come out, the next Halloween to come out and go catch it in theater. It's a sad thing to see that experience going away, because there is something about watching it in the giant dark room with a whole bunch of other people that is lost in watching it just with your close circle all the time in your living room. You know, no matter how big your TV is in your living room. I know a lot of people are building home theaters, and it's very close, but I think there's something about going to a place and having a level of community all reacting to the thing at the same time. It's going to be a sad thing for us to lose. I would hope that it doesn't go away. But I also would hope that the tickets don't keep getting more expensive. Like, why is it super expensive all the time, even if it's not IMAX and 3D? Like, why? Why is it as expensive as it is? And that's going to be part of the problem too, you know. So there has to be a new balance. They have to find a new formula because all these companies, you know, and studios are companies. They're corporations. All these corporations that only care about the bottom line, if they keep raising prices to keep raising the bottom line, the whole reason the bottom line exists won't be able to afford it anymore. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's going to be the same with movies, you know? If you price out of even having an audience, what is the point? So,
You know,
I think they need to listen to shows like this more to hear what the people really think of what they're putting out. Because the old media that we might go back to, the only other thing that would suffer from that is the influence the owner would have. You know what I mean? You'd have to hope that the owner was into being an open and free press and not just going to cater to who they liked.
You know, now for me, the movie going experience gets ruined by the fact, you know, like I had mentioned on the other podcast, you know, there was a point in time when they were going to introduce the NC-17 rating, and High Tension was supposed to be the first film released in the United States with the NC-17 rating, and of course, horror genre was dying to see it. But right before that, there was a little movie called Showgirls that came out, and it was rated NC-17. And movie audiences, or the theaters and the studios, became afraid that the NC-17 rating would now be associated with sex because of Showgirls. So they forced cuts to High Tension. And I thought High Tension, being the first horror film to be released with an NC-17 rating, would have been a huge marketing coup. And part of the reason I think that the movie theater experience is ruined is, one, they won't do that. It seems like true adult horror, and when I say adult horror, I don't mean porn. I don't mean adult in terms of sex. They don't make it anymore for theaters, you know. It's, you know, they don't enforce the ratings at the door. You know, I don't want to go see an R-rated film and have a bunch of 15 and 16-year-olds running around the theater talking on their phone and things like that. Do you think, you know, revamping and actually enforcing the rating systems is something that could save the theaters?
You know, it's interesting. This reminds me of this thing that happened in high school, and this would be the time when, like, the two movies that were out concurrently were Tales from the Crypt's Demon Knight.
Great movie. Saw that in theaters.
And Higher Learning, the sort of college movie with the neo-Nazis and the race relations college movie, basically, with Michael Rappaport. So, I had already seen Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight, and a friend of mine and I, this is before we could drive, so we had to be like 15, 16, something like that. We get dropped off at the theater, and the kid's mom drives away, but they won't sell us tickets because we're too young to Higher Learning, which is rated R. They will sell us tickets to Demon Knight, which is also rated R, but is horror. So it was more, they were more apt to let us into a horror movie where there was nudity and sort of sexual shit, by the way, also. But they wouldn't let us into this, like, racially charged, controversial movie. Like, that was a bigger deal to them. I think there's a certain level where the horror has been sort of like the stepchild of the film industry, figuring because it was just going to be a bunch of monsters and naked chicks running around. I always kind of go back to that when I think about how ratings are enforced. Interesting, too, the fact that people can buy tickets online and just pick them up at the kiosk. It would be, I would love to see what would happen if an usher carded somebody who came in with a ticket, you know what I mean, and they weren't old enough to be able to go see rated R movie. I imagine there would be some kind of huge blowout that people record with their phones and then put up on YouTube, and it gets shared around Facebook, and then people decide to boycott the theater because how dare they not letting a paying customer in, even though the person was 12 and wanted to see Showgirls. You know what I mean? It's like it could. It's. I feel like no matter what rules you put out there, someone is always going to be looking to break them. So there's always someone who's looking to ruin shit for everybody. I feel like the fact that there's a rating system, I always felt like should be enough. That is something that we should be able to self-police on without it being too big a deal. Now, at the same time, if your parents say it's okay, you could go see Demon Knight and they drop you off. You know what I mean? Maybe they should have to walk up to the counter with you, I guess, or they buy the tickets. That definitely would have solved our problem. Is if the kid's mom gotten out of the car and bought the tickets for us, we would have been golden. But because it was just us, that really screwed us that day. Again, this was back in the 90s. These days,
and I hate to say it, that's back when kids knew how to behave in a movie theater.
True. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're getting real close to the end here, but I wanted to ask you just a few more questions. First of all,
Sure.
Where do you see the horror industry going? I mean, we've pretty much, there are very few taboos left. We can argue PG-13 horror, we can argue adult horror, extreme horror, but excuse me, where do you see things going? What's the next level for the genre?
Yeah, I don't know. Next level, I'm not sure. We're in the Blumhouse era. We're in the James Wan era. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely, that's sort of what is dominating the commercial space right now. It's a lot of demonic shit. And I guess, Guillermo del Toro is still kind of a freaky guy. That new Shape of Water thing he's got coming out looks like a little bit of a monster movie. His Hellboy movies were a little off-putting,
Right.
I don't know. We've gone through so many different iterations. Found footage was supposed to be the thing for a while, and that got overdone. Remake City just doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. I remember when I discovered that they had remade Cabin Fever, seemingly, in my mind, for no reason. Like, what the fuck are we doing this for? Like, literally, shot-for-shot remake. This thing came out not long enough ago for me to have forgotten the first one with the kid from Boy Meets World. Like, what are we doing? Incidentally, I just met Jordan Ladd at the New Jersey Horror Con and Film Festival back in September, and I didn't talk to her. I mean, I did talk to her about Cabin Fever, not too in depth. We didn't talk about like the part where the dude was fingering her leg or anything like that. My big thing was about how disturbing it was to be watching her being eaten by a dog while she was still alive and combating this flesh-eating virus. But that movie disturbed the shit out of me. The ultra violence of that movie. So I think for me, one of the things that I liked or marked modern horror for me, Jesus Christ, I'm stuttering like it's ridiculous, was sort of like the Eli Roth stuff, Hostel. That shit was crazy. And I think after that, when I saw that they were remaking Friday the 13th and it was Michael Bay doing it, it was like, wait a minute, fucking Bad Boys guy, Armageddon dude is making horror movies now. And I think that kind of even turned me off to horror a little bit for a while, all the Texas Chainsaw shit. And again, for someone who likes mythology building, you'd think prequels and stuff would be right up my alley, but I just couldn't get behind how commercial those all felt. So I felt like that was a bad direction that horror was going in for a while, and maybe Blumhouse has pulled it a little bit back. But I don't know what could be the next sort of innovative change to the genre. Unless we really start going things like Netflix has that show Mindhunter, which is much more of a drama show, but there are parts of it that are disturbing. I think if whoever comes up with the next Silence of the Lambs, you know what I mean? I think that's going to shift horror.
Sure.
When we had things like Hannibal Lecter becoming a horror icon, even though it was based in a reality, it wasn't like a monster movie. It wasn't a Nightmare on Elm Street. This is a human being who decided to eat other human beings, and was at a level of intelligence that he thought he was above everybody else. That's really some twisted shit to go into, who knows? It could even start touching on some of the new political unrest that we've got going on. You know, the cultish mindset of an uninformed public and how that danger can lead to what's going on, what's
Sure.
going on in our current political environment.
Well,
But
since you brought up Blumhouse, and this will be the last horror question, but you brought up Blumhouse, and they're doing this new Halloween. And again, I'll bring up Rob Zombie. Everyone talked about how they wanted a more violent, a scarier Michael Myers. And I felt like Rob Zombie brought that. Were there flaws in his movie? Yes. But I still thought it was entertaining. Now, everyone shit on Rob Zombie because he changed the original story. Well, the story going in with this new Halloween that Blumhouse is doing is it's going to ignore all the films after the first one. But they have said that they're going to retrofit and change the ending of the original so that it fits the narrative of this quote-unquote direct sequel. How do you feel about that?
That's bullshit. I mean, to me, like, it's always in my mind you pick up where the last one left off and then you do you. You know what I mean? To have to go, it's almost the same thing as the George Lucas going back and putting in CG that didn't exist when they made the movie to recut those original trilogies. You know,
Sure.
It's a little. I don't necessarily know that that's always service to the original or being true or loyal to the original format by having, well, if we just change this one thing about the ending, then it'll match up with this new one perfectly. I was really disappointed when I first heard that it was not going to include Halloween 2 because I felt like Halloween 2 was a pretty solid sequel to the original and didn't really start taking the whole idea off the rails too much. I don't have as much problem with it picking up right after one, but I do not like this idea of it having to retrofit and change the ending. I mean, how do you change the ending of the first one? Well, unless, what is it going to do? One of those things where they replay the final moments of the first movie in the beginning of this one, and they, instead of him not being in that man-shaped hole on the lawn, when we cut back to him, he is still there, but then he gets up and kills a bunch of people. You know, I don't know what they even mean by retrofitting the end of the first one, but
Right.
I always get really leery of, well, we're going to make it work by we're going to pretend that you didn't see any of this other shit. This other shit doesn't exist. It exists. Either reboot this thing or don't. You know what I mean? And if you're not, pick up where it left off. That said, I'm going to see it. I'm excited about it. I really want to see what Danny McBride has done. So, benefit of the doubt is thrown out there.
Definitely. Well, Dave, it's been an honor having you on. Tell everyone again, website, podcasts, social media, where they can find you, where they can listen to you, where they can follow you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I know I get very verbose, and you've been very, very kind and gracious to not be yelling at me for getting so rambly on your show. So hopefully it was as enjoyable for you as it was for me to come hang out.
Oh, for sure, man.
To come see us over in our shop, we're at Hallow9.com. That's the word hollow, the number 9, INE.com. And there you'll be able to check out all of the, I think it's 33 RSS feeds we have. Some of those are in preseason, some of them are in pre-production, but they all have like at least one episode out there. We're on Facebook, Hallow9ine Network. You can find us on Twitter at Hallow9Cast. So all the Hallow9s are the same. The word hollow, the number 9, INE. So on Twitter, it's at Hallow9Cast. Gmail, we're Hallow9Podcast@gmail.com. All of us, you can hit me up at clone@hallow9.com, and that'll go to both of my email accounts. That's how nifty we are. And yeah, for keeping things all horrific, you want to check out our horror cast run by the lovely and talented Liz Joplin, who you saw on the podcast with us a couple weeks ago. And almost all of my camp is all members of the Terraformer Artists Union, so you can always get a hold of us through there as well. I think that's pretty much it. I think that's enough pimping all over your stuff, man.
Well, Dave, again, I want to thank you so much for being on. You're always welcome here on the podcast. If you have ever any horror news, if you guys want to pimp out the horror podcast, let me know, and I'll get that stuff up on Morbidly Beautiful so that you guys get more listeners, man.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, the door's always open. Yeah, definitely got to come hang out with us sometime.
Oh, you know I will, man. I appreciate it, and thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, man.
Anytime.
And once again, we would like to say thank you to Dave Mareska of the Hallow9ine Network for being on the podcast. It really is an honor to talk to another fellow podcaster and to get their view on how podcasting is done and the current state of horror. Coming up in just a few moments, we're going to go into our final digital dismemberment spotlight for the evening, where we will be covering John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness Collector's Edition Blu-ray from Scream Factory. But before that, we're going to go into our final Metal Massacre Spotlight this evening, and this band is Advent Sorrow. The track is actually a single release, and the name of the song is Pestilence Shall Come. And welcome back. You just heard the band Advent Sorrow. Now, the track you heard is a single release that they did on September 22nd of 2017, and the title of the song was Pestilence Shall Come. Now, these guys are an independent labeled band. They put their own stuff out. I recommend heading on over to www.facebook.com/Advent Sorrow to find out more about this band. But now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to go into our final digital dismemberment. And in our final digital dismemberment spotlight for the evening, we are covering Scream Factory's release of John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, the Collector's Edition Blu-ray. Now, of course, this film is directed by John Carpenter and has an amazing cast, including Donald Pleasance, Jameson Parker, Victor Wong, Lisa Blunt, Dennis Dunn, Susan Blanchard, Anne-Marie Howard, Ann Yen, Ken Wright, Jesse Lawrence Ferguson, Dirk Blocker, and of course, Alice Cooper. Now, this film was released in September on the 24th of 2013. And just to give you a little bit of background info, Master of Horror John Carpenter directs this terrifying battle between humankind and ultimate evil. A group of graduate students and scientists uncover an ancient canister in an abandoned church, but when they open it, they inadvertently unleash a strange liquid and an evil force on all of humanity. As the liquid turns their co-workers into zombies, the remaining members realize they have released the most unspeakable horror of them all. Terror mounts as the team must fight to save the world from a devilish fury that has been contained for over 7 million years. Now, this is a highly underrated film in John Carpenter's film catalog, and Prince of Darkness brings together a great cast with a chilling story. John considers this movie to be the second film in what he calls his Apocalypse trilogy, with the other two being The Thing and In the Mouth of Madness. Known for bringing back talent from previous films, including Donald Pleasance, Victor Wong, and Dennis Dunn, roles were written specifically for them by John Carpenter. With the addition of Alice Cooper as the leader of the homeless people outside of the church, the film offers a disturbing look at what evil is and what shape it can take. The camera work, lighting, and locations, along with some chilling effects work and a musical score that finds its way to crawl along your spine, help to make the story more believable and create an atmosphere I don't think John has achieved since Halloween. I have to agree with Alice Cooper and question if John would ever make a sequel to Prince of Darkness, as the ending is very open to another chapter, leaving you wondering what is on the other side of the mirror. Now, to give you the plot, and of course there are spoilers here, a priest lays on his deathbed clutching an ornate silver box, his hands dropping from it as he dies. A nun finds his body the next day and contacts Father Loomis. He starts to read through the dead priest's journals and finds disturbing information. We later see Father Loomis discussing the matter of the box with other members of the church and opens the box to discover a key. We now see Professor Howard Burick giving a lecture on logic and reality at a university to his students, all while Loomis goes to an old church and finds the door that the key opens. Upon exploring, he finds a giant container with a spinning green fluid contained in it. Later, a nun shows up and hands a sealed letter to the professor. He later meets with Loomis, and he shares the diary of the dead priest with him. They go to visit the old church with the container in it, and after seeing it, the professor decides to bring his class to research what the container holds and to translate an ancient text that is found along with it. Now, half of the class is upset about having to give up their weekend, But after being told they will be given extra credit for the work, everyone shows up at the church and they begin to set up all of their equipment. Two of the students, Brian and Catherine, strike up conversation and then later a sexual relationship heading into the weekend. As everyone arrives, we start to notice a gang of homeless people outside of the church, watching the students and what they are doing. After the group sets up all of their equipment and told the theory that what they are observing and testing could be the essence of pure evil, skepticism runs abound until odd things start happening. Insects, worms, and strange bruising start to occur, and then members of the crew are killed off one by the homeless people or possessed by the strange green fluid in the container. As they desperately try to figure out what is going on, the group is trapped in their building by the homeless mob outside, all while being terrorized inside by their possessed classmates. Those that fall asleep are all afflicted by a strange dream that seems like a TV transmission, a premonition of what is to happen. One of the female students, Kelly, is possessed and her body begins to go through a grotesque transformation as she becomes the host to something even more insidious than the others. As a last stand, they barricade themselves into a room and try to fend off the looming evil. Kelly awakens as a transformed conduit of the evil and attempts to bring the devil over from the other side of reality to end mankind for all time. Can the group save themselves from becoming part of the devil's plan, or will evil walk the earth eternally? You're going to have to watch to find out. Now, just like with any other Scream Factory release, the bonus, of course, is in the special features. We have an audio commentary with writer-director John Carpenter. We have a featurette entitled Sympathy for the Devil. And I found that to be a very informative interview with John Carpenter, where he discusses how the project came to be, how he feels the film separates itself from other genre fare by using new ideas instead of reusing the same things over and over, how the audience views films and how fun apocalyptic films are to make. He also discusses different cutting techniques and how they affect the viewing of a film and the different locations that were used. He also discusses how people found his movies again on home video, and this was new for the release. There's also a featurette entitled Alice at the Apocalypse, and this one has rock and roll legend Alice Cooper talking about how he got the part in the film from visiting the set. The look of the character, how his generation was the first TV generation, and how it scared them just the right way. He also highlights how much he respects John Carpenter and his knack for music and how they met, which was actually at WrestleMania 3 in Detroit. He also talks about how then and now it is still a big deal to have been in a John Carpenter film. And that was new for this release as well. Also new for this release was a featurette called The Messenger, and it has actor and special visual effects supervisor Robert Grasmere discussing how the special and visual effects were shot and the challenges that they presented. He also discusses how he received his acting role in the film and how they did his death scene. Also new for this release is Hell on Earth, and it is co-composer Alan Howarth discussing the musical score and the technology that was used for the film and working with John Carpenter. And then Sean Clark has a Horrors Hallowed Grounds on this, and it's a look at the film's shooting locations. Now, something else that's also cool is to have an alternate opening for the TV version that runs about 7 minutes. And in this, the opening credits are much faster, and it suggests that the events of the film could be part of a dream that the character of Brian Marsh is experiencing. It also has the original theatrical trailer. It has 2 different radio spots and a still gallery. There's also an Easter egg on here that runs about 12 minutes long. To access it, if you highlight the tombstone on the second menu of the special features, You can view footage of the 25th anniversary screening of the film at Screamfest 2012 with a John Carpenter Q&A. Now, this film is presented in 1080p high-definition widescreen, a 2:35:1 aspect ratio. Again, as I'm very prone of saying, Scream Factory brings us a great John Carpenter genre classic to Blu-ray and DVD. This has an absolutely amazing digital and sound transfer, and it may be the best Carpenter title brought to Blu-ray yet. The film far surpasses the 1998 Image Entertainment and the 2003 Universal Studios release in all departments, including special features. The new commentary with John Carpenter is fantastic, as is his interview segment. The Horror's Hollowed Ground segment was highly entertaining and informative as usual, but I really feel like the real prize of this disc is the Alice Cooper interview. With a mix of new interviews, the alternate opening, the Easter egg of the Carpenter Q&A at Screamfest 2012, and all of the other special features, Shout and Scream Factory is once again showing why it's the standard bearer for Blu-ray horror releases. I gave this movie a 4 out of 5. I gave the Blu-ray a 9 out of 10. Make sure to head on over to ScreamFactory.com to pick up your Blu-ray Collector's Edition release of John Carpenter's The Prince of Darkness. And once again, I think we really had a fantastic show. I definitely want to say thank you to Dave Mareska of Hallow9ine Network once again for being on. He's an absolutely fantastic guest. I had a lot of fun. I look forward to him being on the show again, and I look forward to being on his show again. It really was a lot of fun. Of course, I want to say thank you to Scream Factory for sending us our Blu-ray editions of David Cronenberg's Rabid and John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. I also want to shout out to the amazing bands that we got to hear tonight. Of course, we had Obituary, Cattle Decapitation, and of course, Advent Sorrow. Next week's show is going to be pretty good as well, as we're going to have writer and producer Max Searche on to talk about filmmaking. And until next week, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Dead Man of Morbidly Beautiful Radio, the Calling Hours Horror Podcast, Coughing Cuties Magazine, and Digital Dead Magazine, telling you all to rest in peace.